learning nerds. Before we begin today's show, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, Idle Courses Academy. If you're looking to transition over into the corporate instructional design space, you need the right guidance to do so. And Dr. Sargent and her team have done an incredible job of focusing on what's important to be a corporate instructional designer, like storyboarding, ID models and theories, authoring tools, project management tactics, and more. They even cover how to make your resume and portfolio stand out from the crowd and have an impressive completion rate with their students working at organizations like Google, Salesforce, GM, Uber, Walmart, and Amazon. Also, you won't be going through the learning experience alone. You'll be studying alongside other aspiring instructional designers, as well as working with experienced coaches. And as an added bonus, you'll get a copy of my book at a discount, What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer. So check out the industry-recognized program that's showing up in job descriptions as preferred training and education by going to idlecourses.com/academy. Enrollment is opening back up again on March 20th, and be sure to use my discount code Luke to save you $88 off your enrollment. And now, let's start the show. Hello, my nerdy people, and welcome on in to the nerdiest podcast you're going to hear today. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I am a senior instructional designer and program manager. I'm also an instructor. I'm an author, wrote a book called What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer, and I make a lot of content online with a blog, a podcast, and a YouTube channel because of the fact, folks, that I love instructional design. I love being able to share more of my experiences with all of you, and by far, this is the highlight of my day. And if you want to learn more about myself or the show, you can head on over to drlukehobson.com. As you all know by now, I've been experimenting with ChatGPT. I think you know about this, just a little bit. And a few weeks ago, I was wondering what would happen if I asked ChatGPT to write about instructional design in a certain kind of way. In theory, could I ask the AI platform to speak about instructional design, but with a twist? That's how I happened to come up with a kind of a weird and different kind of an idea of, can I ask ChatGPT to write about the 10 commandments of instructional design and to make it sound like they came from the Bible? Sure enough, fired up ChatGPT, and it gave me 10 commandments, and it was too good not to share. And I know a bunch of people asked of how many times did you incorporate different types of prompts to be able to get the response? And for this one, it was only once, and it actually gave me the 10 commandments of instructional design. And I wanted to be able to share it because it was funny. It was different. We talk a lot about AI with some serious types of tones and connotations, which I understand, but also we can use it for fun. And apparently all of you agreed with me as I posted it on LinkedIn. I shared it, and at the timing of this podcast, it's up to something like 250,000 people have seen that post, which is just insane. That's also only LinkedIn. That's not taking into consideration Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms, which is absolutely crazy. And the majority of folks who commented on it, they shared the posts, they thought it was funny, but overall, what I kept on hearing too was that people were so shocked at how accurate it was as far as for creating the 10 commandments of instructional design. So on today's episode, I want to break these down, talk more about the learning science and theories behind them, and share a few things along the way. So here we go. I'm going to go in the particular order in which it listed out the 10 commandments. Number 1. Thou shalt begin with the end in mind, for the design of instruction must serve a specific purpose and achieve a specific goal. Beginning with the end in mind is something I've shared with you many times on this podcast, the blog, and the YouTube channel. This is the essence of backward design. First, we start with the end goals in mind, and then, with the naming convention, we then work our way backwards. This allows us as designers to think about the problem we are trying to solve with training with education. This leads us to forming learning objectives that are clear, concise, and transparent for our students and learners. And as we move through the design process, we should always be thinking about these objectives and these goals and making sure that whatever we create for assessments, activities, and content, they will always link back to the overarching goals. When we think about the end results, they become our North Star to guide us along the way and serve as a reminder to think if what we are including in the learning experience will indeed help our students and learners achieve the goals. I also love in this commandment that it mentions serving a specific purpose. Instructional designers have faced the dreaded brain dump, quote unquote, where other parties try to include a million items into the learning experience and it becomes information overload. What goes into a learning experience should be purposeful. Students and learners should be able to visualize the reason why we are asking them to do something like an assessment or activity or even watch a video, and it should be clear and concrete in the why behind the ask. Number 2. Thou shalt know thy audience, for the design of instruction must be tailored to the needs, abilities, and interests of those who will receive it. Research is crucial for an instructional designer, and simply put, you need to know your target audience. The more you can have a sense of their levels of prior knowledge, their expectations of the training or the course, the more you can design a learning experience that will speak to them. This is crucial when working with adults too, because we can then involve them in their own learning process. And because of this, they are far more likely that they're going to want to be able to contribute and actually complete the course or the training or the program or the whatever it is. I do this research process with the courses I teach about instructional design, and it's so helpful with trying to figure out how to customize the activities and content based around their goals and their expectations. For instance, let's say I am teaching an instructional design course and I tailored all of the learning material and exercises to reflect that of instructional designers in higher education. This immediately serves as a disadvantage to anyone taking the course who have a different background. Perhaps are in corporate, freelance, government agencies, nonprofit, K through 12, or something else. Instead, what we should be doing is incorporating multiple perspectives that could be added into the learning experience. And if we really wanted to, we can go super far into this and actually create different forms of learning paths to fully speak to those backgrounds. And now is a good time to mention in this podcast episode too that I will be putting a link down below in the show notes for you to go and to read this blog post, because I do post several different resources throughout this blog of being able to link to things. And what I just actually thought about that is that I link to another article I wrote about talking about creating customized learning paths for students, where essentially you are going to be laying out different kinds of tracks. So let's take the example of the instructional design journey. I could create customized content for someone within K through 12 or higher education or for corporate America, and they can pick and choose what track they want to go down, and then that is going to open up different types of readings and videos and discussions, all tailoring around their specific sector. And at any time, if they want to be able to be flexible with this and actually come off this learning path and go down a different learning path, they can do so. And they have the actual autonomy and the freedom and the flexibility to be able to pick and choose their own path. And as far as I know, the only learning platform that allows us to be able to do this is actually EduFlow. You've heard me talk about them many times for a good reason, because it does allow me to do these different forms of customizations that I can't find anywhere else. So please feel free to go down below into the show notes, read more about that blog post, and I will go into many more details about where I think we can actually go with learning paths. Okay, number 3, thou shalt use examples and stories to make instruction more memorable and meaningful, for the power of narrative is great. It's no secret that storytelling is a powerful tool. It's how we, as a society, have passed down information from generation to generation. For this commandment, telling stories and sharing examples of the real world will make the information stick. If you have ever attended one of my workshops before about instructional design, you'll know that I'm a storyteller. I've found that there is a winning recipe for teaching participants, and this is how it kind of goes with how I do things, is that I'll describe an idea, I'll share a story about the idea to back up the importance and the significance of the idea, the power of the idea, and then I will walk participants through how to actually do the idea on their own. For instance, if I'm speaking about project-based learning, I'll tell you about how to use this effective type of learning strategy, and usually the story that I share around this comes when I was designing web design courses for Northeastern University. We divided these courses thinking about the end goal in mind, which was going to be that by the time that the students completed the course, they would have a fully functional, capable website to really highlight and to showcase their skills. Now, this is a lot to be able to do up front, so it's not like a website can just happen magically with a click of a button. Well, it's kind of becoming like that nowadays. That's gonna put a little note on that to talk more about the future of AI and web design, because that's kind of coming, which is a bit crazy. But for back then, it was far more difficult to be able to do. So breaking these down into smaller, more manageable, bite-sized pieces and submissions made way more sense. So as far as for saying, I want you to be able to go and to think about the wireframing of a website, and then submit that part to the instructor for feedback, collect your feedback, and then keep on going. Then the next submission will be thinking more about the style guide and the logo and the flow. Once again, submit that for more feedback, and you keep on going. And eventually, you do that 3 or 4 times within a semester, and then all of a sudden, you have crucial feedback that's going to be helping you, and eventually, you build out a fully capable and functioning website. So that is what I've been able to do with project-based learning. And then after sharing that kind of story, then traditionally, I will walk you through how to do this on your own and try to be able to talk more about thinking with rubrics, talking about trying to create these different types of instructions for smaller submissions that we usually call milestones and things of that nature. Now, this is just one approach, but this is coming from a type of instructor perspective, if you will, with teaching inside of a workshop. But instructional designers can craft very powerful scenario-based assignments using their own innovation and technology to make the scenario come alive. There could also be role-playing activities with scripts based on real-world cases, or you can even find case studies that will speak to the audience's needs. Creative stories and design absolutely go hand in hand, and you should be thinking about storytelling within your own learning experiences. Number 4. Thou shalt break instruction into manageable pieces, for the mind can only absorb so much at once. This is talking about chunking content. If you've ever sat in a lecture before where the instructor talked at you for 3 hours and you realize you didn't retain anything afterwards, this is an example of what not to do. When you can chunk the content into smaller and more manageable pieces, well, that's when you're on the right track. For instructional designers, we face this challenge quite a bit. For instance, I worked with SMEs before who want to create extremely elaborate and lengthy videos to describe a process, but I need to show them how it's far more effective to divide these into smaller sections. Chunking videos into 5 to 7 minutes in length and then spacing them out over the module of activities and assessments will be far more effective compared to front-loading the entire learning experience with a long form of exploratory content. Number 5. Thou shalt repeat key concepts and reinforce learning through practice, for repetition is the mother of retention. If there had been one commandment that sparked questioning and conversation, it would be this one. Here is how I interpreted this commandment. As instructional designers, we care about retrieval practice and practicing in general. Now, what is retrieval practice if you've never heard about this learning science before? Retrieval practice is the act of recalling information from memory rather than simply rereading or restudying it. The idea behind this is by actively retrieving information, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with learning, making it easier to remember the information in the future. Remember how your teachers would give you a pop quiz and everyone would groan because it was hard to recall the information? I know that my teachers, they specifically waited like 3 days or so after presenting the material. And of course, we're all like, aren't you going to give us a refresher or do something to help us remember the information? They're like, no, it's a pop quiz. You'll figure it out. Well, this is actually what they were doing, and they were spot on with how to effectively make your memory stronger. The real power of retrieval practice is when you can space out your practicing. Cramming the night before, if you've ever done so with flashcards or for anything trying to be able to study for an exam, well, that's not effective. But what is effective is trying to be able to practice every other day for weeks leading up to the exam. And I can give you an example about how I have used this is that in my doctoral program, I had to take something that was called the comprehensive exams. These exams were designed to basically be like the bar exam for lawyers. Well, it's like that, but for doctoral students. students. So it was trying to be able to test me on everything that I learned about over a 3-year period. And the main subjects that I studied about were leadership, sociocultural issues, and research. Now, what made these exams so hard was that you were only going to be given a piece of paper that have a series of questions for you to be able to pick from, and you did not know what topics were actually going to be on the exam. It was really challenging because, of course, you're trying to be able to study all of these different types of subjects, and you're essentially trying to be able to do your best to figure out from a logical perspective what question are they actually going to ask you about pertaining to that particular subject. And of course, these were taken inside of the library where we had no Wi-Fi. There was obviously no open resources or books, and we were even given loaner laptops. It only had like Microsoft Word was inside of them. That was it. And I was like, here you go, take this exam. So in order for me to prepare for this, I actually did incorporate using the spacing effect. We're trying to be able to space out my different forms of studying, but also being able to use this retrieval practice type of a technique. So this is my method. Here is exactly what I did. If you're trying to be able to not cram for something and you want to be able to practice for something and be able to recall the information at lightning speed, this was extremely effective. I didn't know what these words were at the time, but this is my own trial and error practice that this was what I did. I essentially crafted a question that I thought was going to be on the exam, and then using my open resources and my notes, I answered to the question to the very best of my abilities, and I did so roughly about for 30 minutes or so. Then once that was done, I would then go and review everything that I just wrote down, and then I would repeat this process. I would answer the question again, but this time I would put away all my notes and everything, and I would just time box myself and write for 30 minutes with as much information as I could recall. Then I took a break. I waited a day or two, and then I repeated this process again. This time, though, no notes, no nothing, just once again trying to recall from information from my memory. And then once everything was done, then I looked at my notes and saw that everything actually aligned with what I was trying to be able to do. I repeated this process for months with every subject, and it was insane how much I could recall from just memory because of the fact I was doing this so long. It was basically like going to the gym and constantly working out with doing the same exact forms of exercises, nailing down the specific types of patterns and routines. And eventually, that's how you form this type of routine when going to the gym, because you know what to do. You feel confident in your abilities. You start to get stronger, all that type of good stuff. Well, exact same thing does apply, but this time for your brain and for your memory. And it really, really does work. I'm also going to include 2 different resources for this one for you to talk more about retrieval practice, which comes from the Cult of Pedagogy, which is a really great podcast. If you've not listened to that one before, that's definitely one for you to check out, as well as to another blog post that I share more about how you can actually practice and pass these different types of exams if you are a doctoral student, or if you do have something coming up and you really need to be able to remember the information, you can absolutely practice this one too. Number 6, thou shalt use varied and engaging activities to maintain interest and promote learning, for a bored mind cannot learn. One of my many gripes I have about online learning experiences is how repetitive they are and they lack creativity. I have enrolled in many, many online courses before, and most of them follow this exact same pattern. It goes reading, discussion post, and then submit a paper. And now, is there anything wrong with readings, discussions, papers? No, not at all. But eventually, if you do this every single time, every single module, your students and learners are going to recognize these patterns and become bored. When you can already predict what the module or what the training is going to look like before it's even released, that's not a good sign. That's not a great experience. Almost my entire master's degree in the online courses section of my master's was exactly in this format, and it drove me up a wall. In order to try and make it just somewhat exciting for me, I used to purposefully not do any of my work until 11 p.m. at night, and then I was trying to submit everything before the due date for midnight. And this basically, once again, time boxing myself, but in a very unhealthy way of trying to be able to do it. But that was the only way for me to actually care at the time. Granted, younger, I was different, but I was absolutely bored, and this was something that made me at least feel somewhat alive when trying to be able to take these courses. So with all that being said, being able to create a variety of ways to keep your students and learners engaged is essential. This entire blog and podcast could really be about ways of how to do this, so I'm going to do my best to keep it short, and I know I talk a lot, so let me try to do my best here. My first recommendation would be to use several kinds of learning strategies when appropriate. Scenario-based learning, project-based learning, team-based learning, simulations, gamification, micro-learning, narratives, case studies, and many more can all be utilized to make a meaningful learning experience. Depending upon a number of circumstances can dictate which ones to use over others. This can also be applied to learning activities like with practice questions, discussions, reflections, matching drag and drop, check your understanding questions, and things of that nature. Usually, this selection comes down to the project size, the scope, the budget, the resources, the time, the people power, the energy, and things like that. The point, and I want to be very clear about this, the point isn't just to throw the whole kitchen sink into this equation, but to actually find the right ones that are going to serve your target audience. Even breaking up the monotony just a little bit can be this type of a wow factor for some of your very deprived participants. The other recommendation is to use different modalities for your content. You could take one piece of content and transform this into a reading, a video, and a podcast all at the same time. Every time I have done this for my students, they always appreciate the variety. And your participants enjoy content in different ways, so why not provide for them as many options as possible? Yes, it does take quite a bit of time and effort. I will fully acknowledge that, but in my opinion, it's worth it. And as a content creator who makes things online, I try to do this as much as possible, and you can actually see a bunch of examples if you go into my website or just search for some of the past content. We're going to notice that sometimes I will take a podcast script, I flip it into a blog, and then I make a YouTube video about the same thing. Or the YouTube video comes first, and then I download the transcript, make that into a blog, and then that transcript then becomes a part of the podcast. A whole bunch of different ways for you to be able to do this. And overall, your students and learners would love to see your creativity and would love to have more options and flexibility pertaining to the learning experience. Number 7, thou shalt make instruction relevant to the real world, for application of knowledge is the true measure of learning. This commandment comes straight out of the work of Dr. Malcolm Knowles and his 6 principles. This is talking all about andragogy. What we know from these principles is that our students and learners need to see the real-world connections to what they will be experiencing. They need to know the why behind the ask and how it's going to help them. When I design learning experiences, my goal is to have students be able to use what they've learned immediately into the workplace or into their own academic journey. When students can connect the dots and see how they are learning is going to be helping them immediately with trying to be able to solve a problem or move on to the next step with something that they are facing, they are far more likely to continue taking the course or the training. When it's abstract and it doesn't really make sense and it doesn't really tie into the next steps that they can visualize, well, that's going to become a problem. There are several approaches on how to make the learning relevant to the real world, but I'll tell you about 2 of them that I've found to be effective, particularly with adult learners. The first is scenario-based learning, or as you might have heard me say it before, SBL. This is when we create a hypothetical scenario that relates to the real world, and our learners and our students put themselves in the shoes of a character and try to think about how they would solve the issue or move forwards. This is effective because it gives the participants the chance to think about all the different kinds of impacts their decisions would have in the real world. You can design several branches in SBL to show the consequences of their actions. The other approach is with case studies. Instead of taking a hypothetical approach, some sometimes it's more effective to take a real deep dive into a real world complex problem and explore what happened. There are several case studies out there for pretty much every subject, but they are extremely popular within business, communications, culture, leadership, and other related areas. You can find many of them at Harvard Business Review. That's where I pull from many of the case studies that I use for developing courses. Number 8, thou shalt use assessments to gauge learning and adjust instruction accordingly, for the wise instructor heeds the feedback of the learner. I'm so glad ChatGPT put this commandment in here. As both an instructional designer and an instructor, incorporating student voice into my assessments is a critical part of the learning experience development process. Back in January, I started to teach at the University of Miami inside of their EDD program in applied learning sciences. The first thing I asked my students to do was to complete a survey I created that asked about their prior levels of knowledge pertaining to instructional design and online learning. I wanted to incorporate their past experiences into the design process and not just make assumptions. While the main structure of my courses were already in place, hearing from my students about their goals, their expectations, what courses they already have taken, what skills they worked on, their past experiences, that provided me with far more insights into how to customize the assignments and the readings and everything else all for their needs. Every time I hosted office hours, I also was trying to listen to their perspectives and to see how I could help. Their feedback absolutely allowed me to adapt the assessments in real time and to make the courses stronger. One piece of feedback I heard at the beginning of the course was that many students wanted to have more examples. And one example I can share with you is that one piece of feedback that I heard at the beginning of a course was that many students wanted to have more hands-on experience with designing inside of learning platforms and being able to showcase their creations as a part of their portfolios. Even though this was always my intention, I was going to do this no matter what, that feedback gave me reassurance that I was on track with what they wanted to be able to learn more about. So, overall, listening to your audience is key. Number 9, thou shalt use technology to enhance instruction, but not rely on it exclusively, for technology is a tool, not a substitute for good design. A tool is just a tool. I'm confident that I say this to every aspiring instructional designer I talk to. Yes, it's important to know how to use technology, especially if you are designing online courses and trainings. The focus, though, should never be solely about the tool. The learning experience should have plenty of other meaningful assessments, activities, and content. Can technology make these better? Absolutely. Should you try to use every piece of technology into your learning experiences? Please, God, no, don't. don't do that. We have all been subject to mandatory courses and trainings that overwhelmed us with technology. Instead of the focus being on learning, we see how fast we can click on the next button to get our time back. With all that being said, technology should be used intentionally and with purpose. Think about the purpose first and then choose the tool, not the other way around. All right, for our last commandment, let me put on my more deeper biblical voice for this one. Okay, all right, here we go. Number 10, thou shalt always strive to improve thy instruction, for the purpose of excellence is a lifelong journey. All right, well, that felt weird. Okay, well, anyway, for the point of this one for number 10 is that there is no such thing as a perfect course. There never has, and there never will be. We can always find ways to improve our instruction, delivery methods, exercises, and more. Even if a course receives an incredibly impressive rating by your students and learners, you can find one or two improvements. You always can. I just spoke a little bit ago about how I incorporate student voice into my designs at the beginning of a learning experience and how I listen to them during office hours and their feedback. So that's during the learning experience as it's taking place. But let's dive a bit deeper into the end of the learning experience, into the end of a journey. I am a firm believer in pilot programs and collecting real-time feedback from participants. It has never, ever made sense to me to give students a course evaluation at the end of a 16-week semester or to give learners a satisfaction survey at the end of an extensive campaign. If you wait too long, you won't get the feedback you're hoping for. Instead of specific details and real examples that they can point to, you'll receive general overviews and very broad brushstrokes. For my programs, I embed surveys at the end of each week to ask about the timeliness, the engagement, and the relevancy for all the learning material. These responses can inform me about what went well and what could be improved. One key finding I've learned over the years is that the survey responses only tell you some of the information. I've found that I need to follow up with interviews of participants to learn more about the experiences and to ask follow-up questions. The more data, the better the learning experience is really what I have found. The other part of this commandment is to remind us that we are lifelong learners. As instructors, as instructional designers, as teachers, we should adopt the mentality that there is always something new to learn. And this is why I love connecting with many other professionals in my field and hearing what they are finding enjoyable and rewarding for their students and learners. I change my strategies in the classroom based around what my peers have told me, and sometimes it works out really well. Other times, I do not see the same levels of success, but I am not afraid of trying new things and going out on a limb and seeing about if there are any other different kinds of ways that I can improve my learning experiences and trying to find more ways to improve them over time. Now, to put a bow on this entire list, I just want to say, folks, that I have been loving reading all of your extra comments on this entire post so far on LinkedIn and Facebook, and seeing many of you write your own commandments on top of that. I've seen quite a few that will say like, thou shalt not mention learning styles, or thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's learning management system, and many other different types of things. So this has been just a ton of fun interacting with all of you, having a type of a new enjoyable thing for us to be able to talk about. And of course, seeing what has sparked a lot of your creativity out there. I've seen a ton of different posts talking about instructional design, but in different types of ways. Either it's going to be Yoda talking about instructional design, or talking about other different types of, what were some of the other ones? Oh, that's right. There was actually a lot of them that would branch off not just from instructional design, but then you would do your own commandments of teaching, or from an instruction perspective, or for e-learning perspectives or whatnot. So really cool. This has honestly just been a ton of fun to be able to talk about with all of you. Oh, and by the way, I'm up to something. Can't give away too many details yet, but be on the lookout for more information because I am definitely up to something. But folks, that is all I have for you today. Share this podcast with a friend to give them a good laugh talking all about instructional design. And if you haven't already, do so. Please review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you're listening to the show. More reviews keep on coming in. That makes me super happy. That really helps with growing this podcast. And of course, I always appreciate your support. Please feel free to throw me an invite or connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't already done so. And of course, you can find all my social media channels, the YouTube, the podcast, everything else will always be inside of the show notes and over on my website of drlukehobson.com. But folks, that is all I have for you today. Stay nerdy out there, and I'll talk to you next time.